All right, so let's get into a real historical head scratcher. It's all about an artist who was, and I'm not kidding, the biggest star of his time, a total literary giant, a trendsetter, the undisputed king of his field. And yet, have you ever heard of him? Probably not. I mean, we are talking about the man who basically was the entire literary scene of the early Song dynasty. You could think of him as the Drake or the Taylor Swift of 11th century Chinese poetry. So, does the name Yang Yi ring any bells?
Yeah, didn't think so. And the story of how a figure this monumental could be so completely wiped from our collective memory, well, it's not just some dusty historical footnote. Nope. It's a masterclass in what makes art last and what makes it completely fade away.
So, our central puzzle today is the really curious case of the poet Yang Yi. Let's put on our detective hats, shall we? Let's see if we can piece this thing together. This is the big question, right? It's such a dramatic fall from grace. And to really understand just how dramatic it was, we need to see what people were saying about him back then versus what they're saying now.
Wow. I mean, the contrast here is just staggering. In his own day, Ouyang Xu, who was the literary giant that came right after him, said Yang Yi dominated the world. But then you fast forward to the 20th century, and the brilliant critic Chen Zhongsha just torches him, saying his style was like a thin layer of oil, immediately despised. So how do you get from world domination to an oil slick? Let's start the investigation with the man himself.
Let's look at the clues from his origin story. Because before he was a superstar, Yang Yi was an absolute sensation, a true child prodigy. 11. Just think about that. At an age when most of us were trying to figure out long division, Yang Yi was being personally tested by the emperor. He wasn't just some talented kid. They called him a divine child. He was living proof of the dynasty's cultural power. So right from the get-go, he was way more than a poet. He was a political symbol. And the Song dynasty had a whole system for talents like him. It was kind of like a prodigy pipeline. See, he was too young for a normal government job, so he got to stay in the capital, building relationships with all the powerful, older officials. He even became a study buddy for the future Emperor Zhenzong. His incredible writing talent naturally led him to the most important writing job there was, drafting the emperor's decrees. And all that prestige eventually got him overseeing the civil service exams, making him a mentor to a whole generation of scholars. He wasn't just on the path to greatness, he was basically destined for it. But here's the thing. He was no yes man, far from it. He had this fiery, principled personality. The emperor trusted him so much that just seeing Yang Yi singing calmly during tense treaty negotiations was enough to reassure him. And yet, this is the same guy who went AWOL to care for his sick mother, flat out refused a direct order to promote the emperor's favorite consort, and even argued with the emperor about word choice in open court. He was brilliant, but he was difficult, and his talent was so huge that pretty much everyone, even the emperor, just had to put up with it.
So what was this world-beating talent all about? Let's turn to the evidence, his poetry. He created a style that took the 11th century by storm. It was called the Sequin style. So what did it actually sound like?
Just listen to these lines. You can hear it, can't you? It's gorgeous. The sounds, the images, dark brows, full river. It feels so elegant, so sophisticated. Maybe a little sad. But what's it actually about? It's kind of hard to pin down. You get a feeling, a mood, but the specific meaning is just out of reach. And you know what? That was entirely the point. The Zamkhan style was all about this ornate, beautiful language and a super strict musical rhythm. But its most important feature, and I can't stress this enough, was a heavy, and I mean heavy, use of allusions. We're talking dense, obscure references to history and literature that only the most highly educated people would have any chance of getting. Critics had this absolutely fantastic name for this whole method, the otter's sacrificing fish. Just picture it. An otter catches a ton of fish and then lays them all out neatly on the riverbank before it eats. They said that's how these poets wrote. They'd surround themselves with books, pull out dozens of old references, and then arrange them perfectly in a poem. It's an incredible display of knowledge, a real feast of intellect. But for the average reader, it's like trying to eat a fish that's all bones. So this brings us to the motive in our little mystery. If this poetry was so difficult, so packed with obscure references, why on earth was it so popular? Why did it dominate the world? Well, the answer is that it was the perfect style for its specific time and place. First, you had to push from the very top.
Emperor Zhenzong wanted his reign to be seen as this prosperous, sophisticated golden age, and he had one word for the kind of art he wanted: elegant. He wasn't interested in simple, rustic poetry. He wanted something grand, something ornate, something that sounded like it belonged in a magnificent court. The Shikun style, it was tailor-made for this kind of imperial branding.
And second, you had this bottom-up pressure from the scholars themselves. See, poetry wasn't just something you wrote alone in your room. It was a social competition, a kind of intellectual jousting called Cho Chang, or poetic exchange. At parties, one poet would write a poem, and then everyone else had to respond with one of their own, often using the exact same rhymes.
And this tears competition is a perfect example of the game. 200 years earlier, the great Tang poet Li Shangyan wrote a poem about tears using 6 different historical references. So what did Yang Yi and his crew do? They took on the challenge. Yang Yi matched him with 6 allusions. His buddies did the same. This wasn't a competition about who could express the most profound sadness. It was a literary tournament to see who could drop the cleverest and most obscure references. It was all about showing off how much you knew.
Okay, so we've seen his rise. We understand the context. It's time for the final verdict. Why did a style so perfectly made for its time just disappear?
The answer really boils down to who or what the art was talking to. Yang Yi's Shikun style was in this deep, brilliant conversation with its own era. It hit all the right notes for the emperor, for courtly life, for the intellectual games scholars played. But here's the problem. It wasn't in conversation with the ages. It wasn't built on timeless, universal human emotions that someone 1,000 years later could instantly connect with. And this brings us right back to Chen Zhengshu's devastating critique. He said these poets were like licensed thieves who were told to go rob from a single designated house, in this case, the works of earlier poets. They were masters of imitation and arrangement, but not necessarily of original, heartfelt expression that could outlive its moment.
So the ultimate takeaway from all this is pretty clear. A creative work's legacy isn't just about talent. It's about the scale of its conversation. Is it only talking to its own time, or is it speaking to the universal human condition? Yang Yi was a genius at the first one, but that conversation ended when his era did.
And I want to leave you with this thought from the great pianist Glenn Gould. The artists who really truly last are often the ones who, while they live in their time, are not entirely of their time. They somehow manage to tap into something deeper, something that rejects the limits of their own age. Yang Yi was an absolute master of his time, but maybe, just maybe, the real path to immortality lies in being a master of all time.